Archaeologists have begun a major new excavation of the Roman city of Pompeii. It was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago after Mount Vesuvius erupted.
An entire city was destroyed in a single day by a volcano around 2,000 years ago.
There are many stories left to tell about this lost Roman world.
Artificial intelligence and modern. CT scans are penetrating the bodies and casts, separating plaster from actual bone and exposing previously unseen intricacies.
It's very interesting how they found the bodies.
Bone-etched autographs, tiny remnants of life, and a novel pattern that could alter our perception of their demise.
I'll be exploring the ancient landscape for clues and using the latest scientific revelations to uncover how these people lived 2,000 years ago.
We'll dissect that evidence piece by piece tonight to demonstrate what truly transpired during their final moments on Earth. Pompeii's last hours. In the late summer of 79 AD, before midday, people in the Bay of Naples gazed up and saw something that no one could describe. Like the trunk of a massive pine tree, a pale column was shooting straight up from Mount Vesuvius. The column then flattened and spread out like branches on the same tree at the top. They were unaware at the time, but nearly 2,000 years later, they would still be able to read the imprints left by that precise instant. The cloud shape, the fall's speed, and the heat that followed. We can now fully decipher those marks using AI and contemporary CT scans, revealing what actually transpired during Pompeii's last hours. I'm going to examine the lives of 5 individuals using these new findings. A young Roman named Pliny, who witnessed the entire event from across the water in the town of Misum, wrote 2 lengthy letters describing it. The sole surviving eyewitness account is those letters. The lava spill was not gradual. Vesuvius was using bomb-like force to blow rock, ash, and gas. According to contemporary research, the volcano spewed hot gas and debris almost 20 miles into the sky, and it did it with energy that was orders of magnitude more than that of nuclear explosions. For everyone we are watching, the explosion would have caused confusion and terror. Light gray pumice, a frothy volcanic rock, and ash started to descend again like heavy rain. For hours on end, it continued to fall. The weight began to cause roofs to sag. People made an effort to cover their faces with cloth. The floors were knee-deep at first, then ankle-deep. Pompeii was covered in a heavy layer of pumice and ash during the first 18 to 20 hours of the disaster. During that time, Pompeii was a bustling Roman town with thousands of citizens, traders, and tourists. The total population of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and the surrounding coastal towns was estimated by archaeologists to be considerably over 20,000. The remains of nearly 1,500 victims had been discovered in Pompeii and Herculaneum by the time. Excavation could reach the ruins many centuries later, and there are probably many more that have never been discovered. Because some of the buried area is either sealed underground or is beneath contemporary structures, the actual death toll is still unknown. There was no safety at night. Following nearly an entire day of plummeting debris, the volcano's behavior was altered. Above Vesuvius, the tall column started to crumble, and that collapse escalated into something much more horrific. Pyroclastic spikes, a rapid ground-hugging wave of ash, gas, and microscopic rock fragments heated to hundreds of degrees, is known as a pyroclastic surge. It can be compared to a dust avalanche. These waves sweep across the terrain and down the volcano, passing through doors and encircling walls. They struck Pompeii early the following morning after essentially destroying Herculaneum. Because of the ferocity and speed of the waves, people had little time to escape them. Temperatures inside those surges have been measured in the hundreds of degrees Celsius, which is easily hot enough to kill someone in an instant. Everyone inside was done as huge waves crashed onto the streets. Individuals fell from their position. As they attempted to get to the gates, some fell in the open, some in doorways, and some in courtyards. Excavations at locations such as the Nocera Gate, one of the town's southern entrances, reveal individuals who nearly escaped but never left. Many of the corpses were discovered in very lifelike positions due to the violence of that morning. It was more than loose ash that smothered them. Pumice, ash, and roof debris fell, floated, and eventually packed down like cement in layer after layer. The air was shut off almost immediately in many rooms. Beams of wood burned and eventually transformed to carbon. Instead of completely burning away, bread that had been baked in ovens turned black. Everything was trapped beneath this sweltering, suffocating fall, including tables, mattresses, lights, oil jars, and fruit dishes, and then covered by further rubble. Those who had attempted to shelter indoors, believing that solid walls would protect them, were likewise choked to death by the same procedure. The victim's body left an imprint in the ash when the surge and ash buried them. The skin, muscles, organs, and soft bodily parts gradually deteriorated and vanished over time. However, the packed ash surrounding them remained solid, creating a perfect body-shaped mold, a hollow chamber in the ground. The now known Garden of the Fugitives is one of the most agonizing locations where this manifests. There are 13 bodies, men, women, and children, in what was formerly a vineyard and outdoor dining area on Pompeii's southern edge. They were discovered lying on the ground, some in close proximity to one another, and others somewhat apart, resembling a terrified group. They weren't far below the surface. When the last surge rolled over them and murdered them all at once, they were walking on top of a layer of pumice that had already accumulated to a height of more than 11 feet. Excavators didn't give a damn about such tales for a long time after Pompeii was rediscovered in the 1700s. They were not thinking about everyday life or their final breaths. In essence, early excavations were royal treasure hunts. In just a few months, this dig has already yielded some amazing new finds. Workers entered through tunnels, removed jewelry, statues, and painted panels from the walls, and delivered the lovely items to royal collections. This type of looting destroyed context, including where individuals were located, how rooms were arranged, what was sitting next to what, and a lot of before anyone even considered writing them down. Subtle details of everyday Roman life were obliterated. Under the leadership of Jeppe Fiorelli, everything changed in the 1860s. Between 1860 and 1863, Fiorelli was given control of the ruins. Additionally, he regarded Pompeii like a city that needed to be documented, rather than a mine that needed to be depleted, slowing down the process rather than blasting tunnels. In order to map each discovery, he numbered the streets and blocks. Most notably, he came up with a concept that had never been attempted before. He instructed his workers to pour liquid plaster into those hollow, body-shaped gaps in the hardened ash. The end product is precise plaster replicas of the victims in their final moments. They peeled away the ash surrounding the plaster once it had hardened. What emerged was a human figure at the precise moment of death. A knee was pulled up. A hand was visible over a face. Clothes, sandals, and occasionally even a buckle or rope were visible. When Fiorelli employed this plaster technique for the first time in 1863, whole persons were lifted out of the ground. Over time, Pompeii and neighboring locations like Oplantus and Herculaneum produced over 100 of these casts. Animals were also subjected to the same trick. Even a well-known cast of a dog that is still twisted on its chain is present. The casts were on exhibit in museum halls and glass cases. Some remained in the open sheds or small shelters in Pompeii where they were discovered. Nevertheless, the actors were only able to convey a portion of the story for nearly 150 years. You were unsure of whether you were observing a woman or a man. You had no idea if the two people lying together were strangers or members of your family. You had no idea if the person in front of you was young or elderly, ill or well, wealthy or impoverished. The original bones from 1863 remained inside the plaster, locked inside that shell. However, the sole complete body shape that individual left behind would be destroyed if you cracked open that shell to examine it. When scientists discovered a means to gaze directly through the plaster shells without shattering them, the wall finally began to fracture. The secret of Pompeii's castings, CT technology, was the game changer. Computed tomography, or CT for short, is essentially a medical X-ray machine on steroids. From every perspective, thousands of incredibly thin slices of the body are required. A three-dimensional model that can be turned, zoomed, and measured is created by stacking all of the slices, each of which is thinner than around 0.03 of an inch. Hospital scanners, such as the Siemens Summit Definition Flash, can scan an entire chest in approximately 0.5 seconds, while rotating quickly enough to capture a full rotation in roughly 0.28 seconds, or less than 1/3 of a heartbeat. The Pompeii archaeological team accomplished something no one had previously attempted on this magnitude between 2014 and 2016. They began performing full-body scans on the plaster casts themselves after bringing complete clinical CT equipment, including a 16-slice hospital scanner on loan from Philips, directly to the site with assistance from medical partners. At least 86 human casts, including some of the most well-known characters from the Garden of the Fugitives, as well as other restored bodies, were to be scanned. A complete body could be captured by the scanner they utilized in roughly 100 seconds and be strong enough to see through ash, plaster, and metal supports without requiring the transportation of delicate remains to a hospital. Software that can automatically define bone and other hard tissue in CT images is fed those stacks by recent teams. Hospitals are now using the same deep learning algorithms to highlight bone boundaries and even identify cancers without requiring a human to manually trace each frame. These AI models are able to identify genuine anatomy and mend plaster and support rods by learning pattern changes in density and texture. The fact that many of these casts weren't hollow was the initial shock. The CT scans revealed whole skulls, complete jaw lines, and teeth still in place within many of them. The teeth are visible. The teeth are familiar to us. We can examine the diet. Because we can clearly identify the morphology of the pelvis, neck bones, ribs, shoulder joints, spines, arms, and fingers, we are able to determine the sex. Even minute details like hairpins, belt fittings, little pieces of jewelry, and metal. Fasteners pressing up against bones were captured by the scans, things that are completely invisible from the outside. Connecticut cuts revealed what seemed to be a clasp or buckle across the upper chest in at least one victim, something that was never visible through the surface plaster. Each cast was finally more than just a shape because of this level of detail. It was a three-dimensional map of a whole human body. Experts could now perform an actual forensic investigation because they could see those bones. As a person ages, their bones undergo expected changes. Joints in the spine begin to stiffen, teeth deteriorate, and lengthy bone ends fuse. Strong indicators of biological traits in adults are also found in the pelvis and skull. Like a coroner would in a contemporary case, CT allows you to measure those places without cutting. As a result, while the body remained sealed inside its plaster shell on the table, researchers could now determine height, age at death, and even identify previous traumas or healed fractures. However, the scans provided more than just answers to queries. Many stories that people believed to be true were also disproved by them. These remains' twisted positions were typically displayed in museums for almost a century as evidence of prolonged, gasping death. These characters will have their fists clenched and their arms bowed, legs drawn taut, backs arched, faces clenched. Another statement is made by forensics. There's a term for the position. Pugilistic mindset. Pugilistic, like a boxer or pugilist. Firefighters still witness bodies from building flames in this same taut, curled fighting attitude. Muscles quickly dry out and shrink when the body is exposed to extremely high temperatures. They tug on the arms and legs as they get smaller, bending the knees curling the wrists and yanking the elbows in. The rearward arch of the spine is possible. The fingers dig into the palms as the fists clench so tightly. Whether the person is still living or has passed away, this can still occur. It operates automatically. In an instant, victims along. The Bay of Naples were subjected to such intense heat, causing their bodies to lock into the boxer position. Not over a few minutes, but right away. CT scans were in perfect agreement with that account. Researchers saw patterns of cracking and breaking that corresponded with thermal shock when they examined the scans of the ribs, arm bones, and cranium. And then there's the most unsettling case that experts consistently revisit. A case that originates from a body discovered close by in the same disaster area rather than from one of the plaster molds. Researchers examined the skull of a young guy whose body was discovered face down on a wooden bed in the seaside town of Herculaneum. They found no dry tissue when they examined the inside of the skull. They discovered what appeared to be black glass. It was brittle and glossy. Nobody wanted to accept what it was at first. Then, microscopes revealed that the glass still contained small nerve structures. They were examining a flash-cooked glass-like human brain. That glassy substance was tested by forensic experts at the University of Naples Federico II under the direction of Pier Paolo Patron. They discovered lipid compounds and proteins that are consistent with those seen in human brain and spinal tissue. In order to determine how that glass might even exist, they also conducted experiments with heating and chilling. The outcome was terrible. An explosion of heat of at least 510 degrees Celsius is the only way to trap a human brain in a glass like that. That's above 950 degrees, and then the temperature drops so quickly that the tissue doesn't have time to burn completely. That unexpected snap and flash frying vitrification is the term for cooling. According to experts, this might be the first instance of a human brain being transformed into biological glass on Earth. Many outdated museum labels were also humiliated by the CT project. For many years, guides would point to a cast and relate a tale based on its external shape, such as, "This is the mother protecting her child. This is the servant crouching at his master's feet," or "This poor pregnant girl died trying to crawl away." A lady was defined as having a thinner body. A round belly was referred to as pregnancy, and a heavier frame was labeled a man. However, when specialists eventually examined the internal bones, they discovered something unexpected. In a few well-known instances, the pelvis revealed the figure was male rather than female. One more. The condition of several of the cast members themselves was unexpected based on the scans. A handful of the oldest casts had hardly any skeleton remaining within, according to research. In order to maintain the shape, restorers occasionally inserted bracing and metal rods in the late 1800s and early 1900s, then filled everything with filler. To put it another way, not everybody on exhibit was a solid, unaltered time capsule. Some of them resembled repairs that had been patched up to appear complete. Because metal contrasts sharply with bone and plaster, CT made that obvious. The rods were actually visible where a spine ought to have been. Connecticut was unable to discern what everyone truly wanted, despite all of this. When these individuals were living, who were they? From where did they originate? What chronic illness did they have in their bodies prior to that last moment? Pompeii's lost life is rebuilt by AI. At last, scientists are extracting actual biological data from Pompeii's victims. Their nutrition, their diseases, their DNA, and even their possible upbringing. Since the corpses were exposed to intense heat, which typically destroys bone and genetic material, no one for a long time believed that this would ever be possible. However, a multinational team eventually demonstrated in 2022 that actual, readable human DNA persisted beneath all that ash. The discovery of two individuals in the Casa del Fabbro, or House of the Craftsman, in Pompeii, marked the beginning of that breakthrough. They were discovered decades ago by archaeologists. They were both still in the same spot where they had fallen. There was a low couch in the corner of the former dining room that was utilized for lounging during meals. The first individual was a 5'5" man in his late 30s to early 40s. The second individual was a woman who was around 5 feet tall and a little over 50. Researchers targeted a particular area of the head known as the petrous bone in order to obtain DNA without damaging the remains. The petrous bone is incredibly dense and located deep close to the ear. Even after nearly 2,000 years, it still protects DNA better than most other bones due to its high density. Scientists were able to retrieve millions of genetic code fragments from the guy, and enough from the woman to at least identify her by drilling a small sample from that region. In the man's instance, practically his entire genome, basically his entire instruction manual, was rebuilt. His DNA wasn't the only thing the team obtained. Additionally, they detected signals from human-infecting microorganisms. Upon examining his spine, they discovered degeneration in one of the lower backbones that was consistent with a condition known as Pott's disease. When tuberculosis travels to the spine and erodes the vertebrae, it is known as Pott's disease. While he was still alive, an illness was destroying his lower back. Spinal tuberculosis can result in persistent pain, difficulty standing up straight, limb weakness, and even difficulties walking. Researchers noted that he and the woman he was with may not have survived due to his health condition. Leaning against furniture, they remained inside as if there was no way out. With his genome in hand, scientists could now raise a question that many had been wondering about. Eternally. In terms of ancestry, who were these people? According to the man's DNA, he most closely resembled those who lived in central Italy under the Roman Empire. Additionally, his DNA had indications that correspond to populations in the IBB, Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, Anatolia, and portions of the Near East. The same study revealed ancestry connected to Neolithic farmers from Anatolia and some influence from people whose heritage dates back to the Eurasian steppe, among other lineages that first made their way into Italy long before the eruption. This combination is precisely what one would anticipate from a coastal city connected to Roman trade routes. Pompeii was located just south of present-day Naples at the time of the eruption. It was no peaceful small community on a farm. It was a bustling port city that served as a sort of retreat for rich Romans. You had elegant villas with dining rooms designed for entertaining and artwork. However, you also had shipping traffic, workshops, and people traveling from all around to work, service, trade, or be compelled to work. This implies that everyone travels through the same streets, including sailors, merchants, artisans, enslaved and free laborers, chefs, and guards. That image is supported by the DNA evidence. Scientists scaled up after demonstrating that they could obtain this type of data from a single home. By 2024, scientists from organizations in Germany, Denmark, Italy, and the US had collected bone samples from 14 distinct castings undergoing restoration. The team extracted strontium isotope data and genome-wide ancient DNA, or lengthy segments of genetic code, from those bones. Strontium is an element that occurs naturally. Element that, depending on where you were raised, is stored in your teeth and bones. Thus, it functions similarly to a location tag. Together, DNA and strontium allowed them to determine a person's ancestry, sex, and degree of kinship. Things quickly became personal at that point. In one well-known instance, a figure cradling a small child while sporting a gold bracelet was consistently identified as a mother and her child. In another instance, two bodies that were thought to be sisters, or possibly a mother and daughter, turned out to have at least one biological man. The DNA revealed, no, that adult was actually male, and not biologically related to the child. A group of 4 individuals discovered together in an affluent home was also examined in the same study. They were depicted for years as a single, neat Roman family, akin to a tragic last portrait. What the DNA revealed was different. They were not closely related by blood. They weren't children and parents at everything. They ended up at the same hiding spot despite not being related. Since science can genuinely tell us what these folks were eating and how robust their bodies were before the calamity, let's now discuss their everyday lives. Stable isotope analysis is one of the primary methods used by researchers studying ancient diets. Chemical signals from the food you eat are recorded by your bones. Bone collagen, the protein component of bone, has slightly altered chemical patterns after eating diverse meals like wheat, beans, pork, or bay fish. Scientists can determine the type of protein and plant food that Pompeii's inhabitants were consuming by studying the forms of carbon and nitrogen that were trapped in their bones. The outcome depicts a really crowded dinner table. In addition to grain-based bread, beans, lentils, olives, figs, grapes, cabbage, onions, and other vegetables. Pompeii residents also consumed a large quantity of seafood from the Bay of Naples and meat from both domestic and wild animals. Additionally, they were utilizing garum, a fermented fish sauce that Pompeii was well known for selling across the Roman Empire, which essentially meant that everything had a salty fish flavor. The menu wasn't overly sweet. Unlike now, there was no refined white sugar. Fruit and honey were the main sources of sweetness. Their body, particularly their teeth, is affected by that. Researchers examined Pompeii inhabitants' teeth closely and discovered virtually minimal gum disease and cavities. The natural minerals found in the water surrounding Vesuvius, such as fluorine, which functions similarly to the fluoride that gets added to contemporary tap water to preserve enamel. People from 2,000 years ago had teeth that were stronger than those of many adults today. The wear patterns of those teeth and bones can even reveal your lifestyle. Many people were physically active rather than delicate, as seen by strong attachment points where muscles clung to bone. Researchers have found that certain adult males have substantial shoulder and chest structures, while younger men may suffer spinal compression as a result of heavy, repetitive tasks like lifting weights or performing daily manual labor. Others obviously had access to expensive items, cash, and imported food at the same time. In homes with ornate dining rooms, you notice jewels, coins, and opulent items. Additionally, the food record included expensive seasonings like pepper that had to be sent from as far away as India via Roman trade, in addition to regional seafood and agricultural products. Roots. Thank you for viewing. For more incredible tales, watch the videos that appear on the screen.